June 4, 1942. The sun barely touches the horizon. A pale smear over the vast, restless Pacific USS Yorktown sits battered but unbroken. Her hull scarred from a brutal engagement in the Coral Sea smoke coils from her engines, mingling with the salty spray. And the ship groans under the strain of hurried repairs. Sailors move with precision born of exhaustion, their faces streaked with oil and sweat, eyes fixed on the distant skyline where enemy carriers may already be waiting. Every deck echoes with urgency. Repair crews hammer steel. Pilots check their planes. Gunners scrub barrels until they gleam below. The hum of generators and the hiss of steam speak of life, stubbornly refusing to yield to the wounds of battle. The air tastes of salt and anticipation. A tension so thick it could be sliced with a knife. For the next 72 hours, Yorktown will become the pivot upon which the Pacific War may turn. Her crew knows the odds, the danger, and the stakes, yet there is no room for hesitation. The carrier is ready, or at least, as ready as war will allow. Her next battle is imminent. By mid-1942, the Pacific War had already claimed months of American blood and territory, following the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The United States Navy had been reeling, its Pacific Fleet crippled and its morale shaken. The Japanese Imperial Navy, emboldened by early victories, swept through Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific, seizing islands and vital resources with startling efficiency. The fall of the Philippines, the conquest of Malaya, and the strike at the Dutch East Indies had left the Allies on the defensive. Amid this expansion, the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 became the first test of the U.S. Navy's resolve. Yorktown, then barely recovered from Pearl Harbor's losses, had played a crucial role. Aircraft from her deck struck the Japanese carrier Show, sinking it in under an hour. Yet the victory came at a cost. Yorktown herself had sustained serious damage to her flight deck and engines. Repairs were hurried in an extraordinary effort, for intelligence now indicated that the Japanese were preparing a far larger operation, an assault on Midway Atoll, a tiny but strategically vital outpost roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. The Battle of Midway was more than a clash of ships. It was a struggle over intelligence, foresight, and timing. American codebreakers had cracked portions of the Japanese Navy's communications, revealing the planned operation and providing the U.S. a rare and invaluable advantage. Commanders like Admiral Chester W. Nimitz faced a crucial decision: to commit their limited carrier forces, including the hastily repaired Yorktown, against a superior Japanese force. The stakes were stark. If Midway fell, Japan would secure a launching point for further incursions across the Pacific, potentially threatening Hawaii itself. For the American fleet, every ship, every pilot, and every ounce of ammunition mattered. Yorktown's presence, despite her battle scars, could tip the balance. She was not only a vessel, but a symbol, a tangible representation of resilience against an adversary that had dominated the seas for months. Beneath the surface of strategy and intelligence, the human element loomed large. Sailors who had survived Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea now faced the anxiety of returning to combat with barely patched wounds. Engineers labored around the clock, welding and riveting steel, patching engines, and restoring flight operations. Pilots inspected their aircraft with meticulous care, knowing that a single mechanical failure in the heat of battle could mean death. Every officer and enlisted man was acutely aware that Midway would be decisive, that their actions over the next 72 hours could shape the course of the Pacific War. Yorktown's repairs were a testament to American ingenuity and urgency at Pearl Harbor's hastily rebuilt dry dock. Crews had managed to restore her to operational status in record time. Barely 72 hours after sustaining heavy damage, every rivet, every plank, every bolt carried the weight of survival. The urgency of a fleet stretched thin across thousands of miles of ocean. The ship became a living metaphor for determination, under pressure, embodying the Navy's desperate gamble to intercept and neutralize the Japanese threat before it could consolidate its gains. Meanwhile, the Japanese fleet was a formidable opponent. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, formed the backbone of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's strike force. Each carried dozens of aircraft. Trained for precision and speed, the Japanese had planned meticulously, confident in the ability of their carriers to deliver a crushing blow to Midway, and the American fleet overconfidence would prove fatal. But at this moment, the U.S. could only speculate, relying on the brilliance of intelligence work and the courage of its sailors to meet the coming storm. Yorktown, sitting amidst the immensity of the Pacific, was no longer just a ship. She was a lifeline, a symbol of hope, and a test of whether skill, courage, and ingenuity could overcome firepower and experience. The stage was set, the pieces in motion. By the morning of June 4th, the outcome of the Pacific War would hinge on the decisions of men whose lives, and those of thousands of others, were bound to a single carrier. As June approached, the full scale of the Japanese operation became clear. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, sought to lure the remaining American carriers into a trap. Midway Atoll, with its modest airfields and strategic location, was the bait. Yamamoto's plan relied on deception and overwhelming force. 4 fleet carriers, 2 battleships, numerous cruisers, destroyers, and submarines formed the striking force. Each carrier bristled with aircraft fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes ready to dominate the skies and seas. In his mind, victory seemed assured. Across the Pacific, U.S. Naval Command confronted a daunting reality. Only 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, stood between the Japanese fleet and Midway. Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet, faced a calculation of immense risk. Committing Yorktown, still recovering from Coral Sea, was perilous yet. Intelligence gathered by cryptanalysts at Station Hypo in Hawaii provided a rare advantage. By breaking portions of the Japanese naval code, the Americans knew not only the target Midway, but also the timing and composition of the attack. For the first time, a U.S. commander could anticipate an enemy strike rather than react blindly. The implications were profound. Every sailor, pilot, and officer understood that the margin for error was minimal. Yorktown's crew, patched together after Coral Sea, embodied the Navy's gamble. Engineers had restored her flight deck to near full operational capacity. Fuel lines, elevators, and armaments had been hurriedly inspected, repaired, and tested. Pilots practiced rapid launches, knowing that their aircraft might be the first and last line of defense against a vastly superior enemy. Human endurance was tested to its limits. Sailors slept in shifts, often on steel decks, their rest punctuated by the shriek of alarms, and the relentless Pacific Wind officers coordinated every movement with precision. Damage control teams rehearsed emergency drills, gunners recalibrated anti-aircraft batteries, and flight crews ran through checklists with near-obsessive focus. This preparation, born of urgency and necessity, reflected a broader American determination. The war could be lost with hesitation, and victory demanded audacity. The Japanese, meanwhile, exhibited confidence bordering on hubris. Admiral Nagamo, commanding the carrier strike force, maintained strict operational discipline, relying on rigorous training and superior aircraft. Yet, intelligence gaps and assumptions about American weakness would soon prove fatal. While the Japanese anticipated a conventional defense, they did not anticipate foreknowledge, nor the psychological resilience that the U.S. Navy had cultivated under immense pressure. Midway was a chessboard of immense scale. With Yorktown poised as a decisive piece, her presence offered Nimitz a strategic counterweight, enabling the American carriers to position themselves advantageously. The interplay of intelligence, speed, and human courage was about to collide with raw firepower. in a confrontation that would define naval warfare for generations. In these tense hours, the stakes were both strategic and human, each man aboard. Yorktown understood that the next 72 hours could mean survival or death. The Pacific, vast and indifferent, awaited the clash of fleets here. History would not be written by the strongest alone, but by those who combined courage, skill, and foresight in the most desperate of circumstances. On USS Yorktown, the human element was as critical as steel and firepower. Sailors who had endured Pearl Harbor and the Coral Sea now faced the looming shadow of Midway. Exhaustion clung to every man like a second skin. Sleep was a luxury. Adrenaline and fear were constants. Men worked in rotating shifts, often on the steel decks, drenched in salt spray, grease, and sweat, moving with mechanical precision. Yet beyond the physical strain lay an emotional crucible. Young aviators, some barely out of training, knew that their next takeoff could be their last. Damage control teams faced the constant possibility of fire or flooding. Each task a life-or-death gamble. Officers moved among the crew, their presence both directive and reassuring, attempting to maintain calm in an environment that brooked none. Moments of laughter, whispered prayers, or a brief glance at a fellow sailor offered fleeting relief from the tension. These human connections, small and fragile, forged cohesion, a quiet strength that would prove decisive. Yorktown's crew understood that their ship was more than metal. It was their lifeline, their home, their chance to influence history. Every rivet hammered, every aircraft checked, every gun polished became a testament to determination. In these men, courage and exhaustion coexisted. A fragile but potent combination. Their humanity, their fear, resolve, and ingenuity was the backbone of Yorktown's 72-hour resurgence. Tactically, Yorktown's role was pivotal. Carrier warfare in the Pacific demanded coordination, timing, and foresight. Unlike battleship engagements of previous eras, aircraft carriers extended the battlefield far beyond the horizon. Yorktown's planes, F-4F Wildcats, SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, could strike hundreds of miles from the ship, making positioning and timing critical. The challenge lay not only in launching aircraft but in ensuring they returned safely amid enemy fire. Each carrier movement, each formation change, risked exposure to Japanese reconnaissance and airstrikes. Yorktown's crew had to balance aggression with caution, maintaining enough aircraft on deck for rapid deployment while preserving planes for defensive cover. In addition, Yorktown's hastily repaired state posed a tactical dilemma. Her damaged elevators and flight deck limited sortie rates, forcing commanders to prioritize targets and timing with surgical precision. Yet the U.S. Navy leveraged intelligence and deception to compensate, positioning Yorktown to launch surprise attacks on Japanese carriers at moments when enemy planes were vulnerable. Here, tactical acumen intersected with audacity, proving that careful planning could offset material limitations. Technology played a silent but decisive role in Yorktown's comeback. Despite her damage from the Coral Sea, repair teams had restored her flight deck, catapults, and elevators to near full operational capacity. Every piece of machinery, from the radar and communications arrays to the anti-aircraft batteries, was inspected, repaired, and tested. Aircraft themselves were technological marvels of their era. SBD, Dauntless dive bombers, required skilled coordination, from arming bombs to calculating dive angles and release timing. Torpedo bombers, slow and vulnerable, demanded precision and courage on board. Radar, still in its infancy, gave Yorktown's crew a critical edge, detecting incoming aircraft and alerting gunners to threats beyond visual range. Every system, from mechanical to electronic, was pressed into service, emphasizing the delicate interplay of human skill and technological capability. Damage control innovations were equally crucial. Fire suppression systems, pumps, and compartmentalization, allowed the ship to withstand hits that might have sunk less prepared vessels. This combination of repair, ingenuity, and operational technology enabled Yorktown to re-enter battle at a moment when her very presence could determine victory or defeat. Leadership aboard Yorktown and across the Pacific Fleet shaped the battle's outcome. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, commanding at Midway, had to balance aggressive engagement with preservation of limited resources on Yorktown. Captain Elliot Buckmaster coordinated repairs and flight operations, enforcing discipline while inspiring confidence. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, in Pearl Harbor, bore the weight of strategic foresight. His decisions to commit Yorktown despite prior damage, to rely on intelligence, and to orchestrate a carrier ambush demonstrated a mastery of both calculation and intuition. Leadership extended to junior officers, who ensured that every crew member understood their role and executed it flawlessly, even under extreme pressure. In battle, leadership was more than orders, it was presence, example, and morale. Captains and lieutenants moved among decks, observing, advising, and motivating, translating strategy into action. The success of Yorktown's crew was inseparable from the quality of command, proving that courage, organization, and decisiveness at every level were as critical as any gun or aircraft. The Japanese fleet at Midway represented one of the most formidable naval forces ever assembled. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's strategy relied on precision, surprise, and overwhelming air power. His 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were bristling with aircraft, each trained to strike with deadly efficiency. Every pilot had drilled for months, rehearsing attacks, formations, and landings with near-obsessive exactitude. Yet Yamamoto and Vice Admiral Koichi Nagamo underestimated 2 critical factors: American intelligence and the resilience of their opponent. The Japanese assumed the remaining U.S. carriers were weak or distant, unaware that codebreakers had revealed the exact timing and location of the Midway assault. Nagamo's strict adherence to doctrine delayed crucial decisions at pivotal moments when American dive bombers appeared almost unexpectedly. Japanese carriers were caught in the vulnerable state planes on deck, refueling, rearming. The tactical surprise turned Japanese confidence into chaos within minutes for Yorktown's adversaries. The American carrier represented both a tangible threat and an unknown variable. Unlike previous engagements, the Japanese faced an enemy who had anticipated their moves. Their reaction was swift but imperfect, and their numerical advantage was eroded by intelligence, timing, and human resolve. In this, the enemy angle reveals that victory is not determined by numbers alone. It requires adaptability, awareness, and foresight. Beneath the hardware and strategy lay the psychological battleground for Yorktown's crew. Every action was intensified by awareness of mortality. Each takeoff, each bomb release, each anti-aircraft volley carried with it the weight of survival. Duty and honor. Fear was omnipresent, yet it became a motivator rather than a paralyzer. Courage was not the absence of fear, but its harnessing in service of the mission. For pilots and sailors alike, the psychological stakes were staggering. Men pushed beyond physical limits, relying on instincts honed through training, experience, and trust in their comrades. A single miscalculation could result in death, not just for themselves, but for those dependent on them. Damage control teams, working in near darkness amid smoke and fire, embodied the same quiet heroism. Every plugged leak, every extinguished flame, represented the collective effort to defy disaster. Even for commanders, stress was relentless. Nimitz, Fletcher, and Buckmaster bore responsibility for thousands of lives and the strategic future of the Pacific. Every decision carried moral weight. Every order had consequences beyond strategy. Success depended on balancing aggression with prudence, resolve with restraint, and authority with empathy. The moral and psychological dimension underscores that Midway was not just a test of steel, strategy, or aircraft. It was a test of the human spirit. Yorktown's 72-hour campaign demanded resilience, unity, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. In these hours, fear and heroism intertwined, shaping the course of history. June 4, 1942, dawn broke over the North Pacific, casting pale light across the endless blue expanse surrounding Midway Atoll. Yorktown, despite the scars of Coral Sea and the hasty repairs, prepared to launch her aircraft. The deck was a hive of controlled chaos. Pilots sprinted to their planes. Ordnance crews checked bombs and torpedoes, and gunners readied their anti-aircraft batteries. The tension was palpable. Every sailor knew that the hours ahead could determine the fate of the Pacific. At 7 o'clock, the first wave took to the sky. Yorktown's SBD, dauntless dive bombers, ascended in tight formations, engines screaming, their wings cutting through low-hanging clouds. Targets were marked: Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, each bristling with aircraft. Decks alive with motion. Intelligence had provided the Americans with an edge, but victory still depended on precise execution. Any misstep could spell catastrophe. Moments later, the Japanese launched their first strike against Midway. Aiming to cripple American defenses, Yorktown's anti-aircraft gunners engaged incoming planes with a combination of skill and desperation. Explosions rocked the carrier, shrapnel flying as men braced for impact. Fires flared, smoke billowed, yet the crew pressed on, launching and recovering planes with meticulous coordination. The ship's resilience mirrored that of her crew, patched decks and repaired elevators performing under the pressure of combat. The first strikes from Yorktown's aircraft began to find their mark: dive bombers, hurtling toward the Japanese carriers at near vertical angles. Released bombs with deadly precision. Flames erupted on Akagi and Kaga, the decks alight with fire and chaos. Soryu was hit moments later. In minutes, what had been a formidable and confident enemy became a battlefield of smoke, fire, and destruction. Japanese pilots struggled to regain control amidst the carnage, while American aircrews turned to Yorktown for fuel, rearming, and redeployment. Yet Yorktown herself was not unscathed. At 9:30, Japanese bombers returned, targeting the carrier with torpedoes and bombs. Despite damage control teams working tirelessly, explosions tore through her decks, smoke filling passageways, and the threat of fire and flooding pressing ever closer. Sailors battled against both enemy attacks and the very ship they served, pumping water, sealing bulkheads, and ensuring aircraft could still take off. Every second was a duel against destruction. Every action a measure of courage under impossible conditions. By mid-morning, the tide had shifted. Japanese carriers were burning, capsized, or abandoned. Yorktown's presence had drawn enemy attention, but it had also enabled a decisive American counterstrike aircraft from Enterprise and Hornet joined the fray, amplifying the devastation. Japanese formations, once precise and confident, became fragmented and reactive, unable to regroup effectively in these critical hours. The combination of foreknowledge, tactical skill, and human resolve produced results that numbers alone could not explain. The intensity of battle pushed every individual to the limit. Pilots flew multiple sorties, gunners remained at their stations through exhaustion, and engineers navigated smoke-filled compartments, repairing damage under constant threat. Commanders relayed orders, adjusted formations, and coordinated attacks, making split-second decisions with far-reaching consequences. The human, tactical, technological, and leadership elements converged in a singular, violent crescendo, an orchestration of strategy, skill, and sheer willpower. By late afternoon, the first phase of Midway had reached its apex. 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were effectively neutralized. Flames and smoke rose above the ocean, a testament to precise timing, audacity, and the courage of men operating under extraordinary pressure. Yet the battle was far from over. Hiryu, the remaining carrier, still threatened the American fleet. Yorktown, battered and partially compromised, would soon face another wave of attacks that would test her resilience, and that of her crew, to the absolute limit. As June 5th dawned over the Pacific, USS Yorktown bore the scars of relentless combat. Fires had been extinguished, holes patched, and flight operations partially restored. Yet the threat remained unrelenting. Japanese aircraft, now desperate to halt the American counteroffensive, returned in waves. The carrier, though battered, prepared to launch and recover planes with grim determination. Every crew member knew that the hours ahead would test courage, skill, and endurance to the limits. Yorktown's aircraft again took to the sky, joining the broader American assault that aimed to neutralize the last remaining Japanese carrier. Hiryu bombers and fighters struck with precision, weaving through anti-aircraft fire and clouded skies below deck. Gunners and damage control teams worked in perfect synchrony, extinguishing flare-ups, sealing ruptured bulkheads, and keeping the ship operational despite mounting hazards. Hiryu's planes retaliated, targeting Yorktown with torpedoes and bombs. A direct hit pierced her flight deck, detonating fuel stores and wounding sailors. Explosions rocked the ship, sending shockwaves across decks. Smoke and flames filled passageways, reducing visibility to near zero. Yet the crew's training and resolve held fast. Pumps chugged, fire hoses hissed, and sailors risked their lives to maintain the ship's integrity, even under severe duress. Yorktown continued launching sorties, delivering decisive blows that contributed to Hiryu's eventual destruction. The Japanese fleet, once confident, now faced chaos. The loss of carriers, aircraft, and trained pilots had shattered operational cohesion amid burning decks and exploding magazines. Japanese commanders struggled to mount effective counterattacks. The tactical advantage had shifted entirely to the Americans. And Yorktown's contribution, despite her damage, was pivotal. Intelligence, planning, and sheer tenacity had combined to achieve what seemed impossible: the neutralization of a superior enemy force. Yet the victory came at a cost. By the afternoon of June 6th, Yorktown's condition had worsened. Flooding, structural damage, and fires rendered her increasingly vulnerable. Attempts to tow the carrier to safety began, but Japanese submarines prowled the waters. Determined to capitalize on her weakened state, a torpedo struck amidships, delivering a catastrophic blow that could not be repaired despite heroic efforts. The ship began to list sailors evacuated, some remaining to ensure others could escape, their bravery marking the final chapter of Yorktown's operational life at Midway. In these climactic hours, the human element intertwined with strategy and technology, decisions made by commanders, split-second reactions of pilots, and tireless efforts of deck crews determined not only the outcome of battles, but the survival of thousands. Yorktown, though ultimately lost, had altered the course of the engagement. Her aircraft had struck devastating blows to Japanese carriers. Her presence had drawn attacks that, paradoxically, allowed American forces to exploit weaknesses elsewhere. The 72-hour struggle revealed the full spectrum of naval warfare: intelligence and planning, courage and endurance, technology and improvisation, leadership and sacrifice. In the end, the Battle of Midway was not won solely by numbers or firepower, but by the combination of foresight, bravery, and human resilience exemplified aboard USS Yorktown. As night fell on June 6th, the immediate threat to Midway had passed. 3 Japanese carriers lay in ruins, their crews decimated or forced to abandon ship. Hiryu, after initial retaliation, had been destroyed by relentless American airstrikes. The Pacific theater had experienced a pivotal turning point, a strategic victory that shifted momentum firmly into Allied hands. Yet amidst triumph, the shadow of Yorktown's damage lingered, a reminder that even victories are paid for in courage, sacrifice, and human endurance. By the evening of June 6, 1942, the Battle of Midway had concluded in a stunning and decisive American victory. The Japanese Navy, once confident and seemingly unstoppable, had lost 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, along with hundreds of aircraft and experienced pilots. Yorktown's role, despite her battle scars, had been pivotal. Her aircraft struck critical blows. Her presence drew enemy attacks, and her crew's resilience kept her operational long enough to influence the battle's outcome. The human cost was stark on the American side. Over 300 men were killed or wounded during the engagement, including pilots shot down over the ocean and sailors lost to fires and explosions aboard carriers. Yorktown herself would ultimately sink in the days following Midway, torpedoed by Japanese submarines while under tow. Yet the losses were measured against a strategic victory of unparalleled significance. The Pacific Fleet had delivered a blow that irreversibly weakened Japanese naval power and preserved the U.S. hold on Midway, a critical forward base. Strategically, the implications were immediate, and far-reaching. Japan's offensive momentum in the Pacific was halted. Their plan to seize Midway and potentially threaten Hawaii had failed catastrophically. The destruction of experienced carrier pilots, who were difficult to replace, left the Japanese fleet vulnerable for months to come. For the United States, Midway demonstrated that intelligence, preparation, and audacity could overcome numerical and material disadvantages. The battle confirmed that aircraft carriers, not battleships, now dominated naval warfare, reshaping naval doctrine for the remainder of the war. Beyond strategy and numbers, the aftermath revealed the extraordinary human effort behind Yorktown's temporary resurgence. Sailors who had labored tirelessly to repair a heavily damaged carrier had ensured her operational capability at a moment when every plane mattered. Pilots who flew repeated sorties, engineers who patched decks under fire, and officers who coordinated the chaos all contributed to a victory that would become legendary. The story of Yorktown at Midway became a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the power of coordinated human effort under extreme pressure. The psychological effect on both sides was profound for the Japanese. The loss of 4 carriers and the near annihilation of trained pilots shattered morale and forced a reconsideration of offensive strategy. Confidence had been replaced with caution, and the illusion of invincibility dissolved for the Americans. Midway ignited a renewed sense of possibility. The victory demonstrated that careful planning, courage, and intelligence could turn the tide against a seemingly superior opponent. Sailors and pilots returned to their ships with a hard-earned confidence, aware that the war was far from over, yet knowing that skill, determination, and bravery could decisively influence outcomes. Midway also marked a shift in naval warfare doctrine. The battle underscored the importance of aircraft carriers as the decisive instruments of power, supported by intelligence, radar, and coordinated air operations. Yorktown's temporary return to combat highlighted the potential for damaged ships to continue contributing meaningfully when human ingenuity and technical skill were applied effectively. This lesson would echo throughout the Pacific campaign, influencing carrier operations, repair strategies, and the training of crews for years to come. As the smoke cleared over the Pacific and the wrecks of Japanese carriers smoldered, the cost and consequences of Yorktown's 72-hour struggle became evident. Ships, planes, and men had been lost, but the battle had shifted the balance of power, and the Pacific victory had been won not solely through force, but through the combination of strategy, courage, human ingenuity, and relentless determination, a combination exemplified by Yorktown and her crew. In the days following the battle, USS Yorktown's final fate became a sobering reminder of war's harsh reality. While under tow toward Pearl Harbor for repairs, Japanese submarines tracked the damaged carrier. On June 7th, A torpedo struck amidships. Followed shortly by a second hit. Damage control teams fought desperately. But the ship's structural integrity failed. Orders to abandon ship were given, and sailors evacuated into lifeboats and rafts. Later that day, Yorktown sank beneath the Pacific waves, a testament to both the destructive power of war and the indomitable spirit of her crew. Though lost, Yorktown's contribution to Midway was undeniable. Her aircraft had participated in critical strikes against Japanese carriers, and her very presence had drawn enemy attacks that shaped the battle's unfolding. In tactical terms, she had provided the leverage necessary for American forces to exploit intelligence, position aircraft effectively, and deliver decisive blows. Without Yorktown, the destruction of the Japanese carriers may have been slower or even less complete. The broader operational lessons of Midway reshaped naval thinking. Commanders recognized the vulnerability of carriers when caught with aircraft on deck, the necessity of rapid repairs under combat conditions, and the value of integrated intelligence. Yorktown's rapid return to battle demonstrated that even damaged ships could exert strategic influence if crews and commanders applied ingenuity and determination. Repair protocols, crew training, and damage control procedures were refined based on these lessons, influencing future engagements throughout the Pacific War. Midway also highlighted the human dimension of warfare. Personal accounts from Yorktown's crew recount moments of courage, improvisation, and sacrifice. Sailors braved smoke-filled compartments, fires, and explosions to maintain operational capability. Pilots flew multiple sorties despite fatigue and injury. Officers coordinated under immense pressure, making split-second decisions with life-or-death consequences. These acts, individually small yet collectively enormous, illustrated that battles are won not solely by ships or planes, but by the people who operate them under extreme conditions. The psychological impact reverberated across both navies. The Japanese Navy, stunned by the loss of 4 carriers and hundreds of veteran pilots, faced diminished offensive capability and a blow to morale that would linger for months. In contrast, American forces drew renewed confidence from a victory that seemed improbable just days earlier. Midway demonstrated that meticulous intelligence, strategic foresight, and human resilience could overcome superior numbers and firepower, a lesson that would shape Allied strategy for the remainder of the war. Finally, Midway and Yorktown's heroism left a lasting historical legacy. The battle marked a turning point in the Pacific theater, establishing the dominance of U.S. naval aviation and carrier warfare. Yorktown's 72-hour struggle symbolized the broader themes of courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice that defined the conflict. Her crew's actions became a model for naval operations, demonstrating that determination and skill could make a difference even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the Pacific waves claimed Yorktown, they also carried forward the enduring story of her crew's valor and the strategic triumph that shifted the course of World War II. The immediate consequences were tangible: ships destroyed, lives lost, and territory preserved. But the true impact lay in what Yorktown had proven: that preparation, intelligence, human courage, and tenacity could converge to alter the fate of empires. The story of USS Yorktown at Midway is more than a tale of steel, fire, and aircraft. It is a testament to human resilience under extreme pressure. In 72 hours, a damaged carrier, hastily repaired and manned by exhausted sailors, helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. Her crew demonstrated that courage, skill, and ingenuity could outweigh material disadvantages. That determination could bridge the gap between near defeat and historic victory. Midway reshaped naval warfare. The battle confirmed the aircraft carrier as the dominant instrument of sea power, replacing battleships as the decisive asset. Technology and strategy intertwined. But it was human resolve, the coordination of pilots, gunners, engineers, and commanders that made the difference. Yorktown's temporary return to battle illustrated that even a wounded ship, when guided by skilled hands and relentless determination, could shape the course of history. Yet beyond strategy and victory lies the human dimension. Yorktown's crew faced fear, exhaustion, and the constant presence of death. And still they pressed on. Their heroism was quiet, methodical, and unglamorous, a measured bravery born not of spectacle but of necessity. The sacrifices made in those days remind us that history is written not only in maps and statistics, but in human endurance and spirit. The 72 hours of Yorktown's comeback offer a broader lesson, that resilience, preparation, and courage can converge to overcome overwhelming odds. Her story endures as a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the profound impact of ordinary men and women rising to extraordinary circumstances. The Pacific may have been vast, indifferent, and merciless, yet in the midst of war's chaos, Yorktown's crew proved that human determination can alter destiny. In the end, Yorktown sank beneath the waves, but her legacy did not. Her actions, and those of her sailors, echo through history as a reminder that even in the darkest hours, courage and ingenuity can illuminate a path to victory. Midway was more than a battle. It was a crucible in which human spirit, strategy, and sacrifice converged, and in that crucible, USS Yorktown achieved an astonishing, unforgettable triumph.